Now, going back to the earlier discussion we were having here about spirituality and young people. So, observing that young people are becoming sort of increasingly politically active, they're engaging in this protest culture, this fight against these various forces that they've identified, and it's being incentivized by the university, by mainstream media, by Hollywood celebrities, people posting about racism all the time. And so, there's this exaggerated sense of this problem existing. So all of that being true, how do young people get out of that position? How do they find, and this is a question that I really want to ask you here, is how do young people find a value system to adhere to, given that religion is on the decline, given that religion doesn't seem cool, or just for whatever reason it's not resonating, right? Ideology is resonating, not religion. But how do we replace that with something spiritual that fulfills our inner innate desires to strive for, God, the infinite being, the divine, whatever name you want to use for that?
Well, we could take that apart. I mean,
Sure.
you might say, well, what might you replace an ideology with? And I would say, well, a differentiated view of and strategy for life. And so when I work with my clients, I never start with high order problems to begin with, like how do I orient myself spiritually? So let's just leave that aside for a second. Okay, we'll return to it. So, okay. What do you need to get straight in your life? Well, you need a job or a career, preferably, perhaps. The advantage to a job is that you do it for 8 hours, let's say, and you're done, right? With a career, you're in it all the time. Now, you'll make more money, you'll advance up the economic hierarchy, but you're never done with work if you have a career. And maybe that's what you want. But in any case, you have to have a job or a career. Why? Well, you don't want to starve. You want to take care of yourself and the people that are dependent on you. There are practical, obvious practical reasons, but there are psychological reasons too. I mean, a job gives you something to do every day, just as your career does. And it also addresses the deep human need to be of value and service to other people. And so that needs to be attended to. So if you're a young person, it's like, okay, have a plan. You need a job and a career. It would be good if it was something that you could be competent at. So the smarter you are, pure IQ, the more complex job you can manage. And then if you add the development of discipline to that, so that's the development of conscientiousness, that can further you. So you need conscientiousness and intelligence to be competent. And the more hardworking you are and the more intelligent, the more complex the job you can manage. So if you're of average intelligence, which you've probably figured out by the time you're 18 or so, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to be a high-end corporate lawyer unless you work insanely hard. So your better bet is to pick a profession that isn't so cognitively demanding, that's still useful. And trades are great as far as I'm concerned. It's not like tradespeople aren't skilled, and it's not like trades don't require intelligence. I am not saying that. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't require as much abstraction, generally speaking. Like if you want to be a lawyer, you have to be hyper literate and like 90th percentile literate fundamentally. And you have to be able to formulate verbal arguments, or you're going to get crushed by someone who can do it. Okay, so job and career, you need a plan. Okay, education, you should be as educated as you are intelligent. You should have a plan for that.
Yeah.
Okay, and it should continue because things change quick and you better keep up. Okay, so you should have a vision of that. People don't seem to do well without an intimate relationship. It'd be good if you could have a family and bring peace to the family that you have, because family is important, extraordinarily important. Those connections, so intimate relationship and family, whether that's your parents, your siblings, or the family that you start, you need a plan for that and a vision of that. You have to take care of your physical and mental health. You have to regulate your drug and alcohol intake. You have to figure out how to make productive and meaningful use of the time that's allotted to you outside of your obligations. That's extraordinarily useful. And you have to address your philosophical or spiritual slash aesthetic yearnings, such as they might be. Well, so that's better than an ideology, a plan.
Sure. Right.
Now, and as you climb up your career, as you expand your competence and power, well, then you can get involved in larger scale transformations if that's where your interest takes you. And so with job and career, you should be competent and interested in it. That's a good pathway to success. All right. So, so that's the right place to focus as far as I'm concerned. If you're a young person, it's like, well, have a plan, have a plan.
Right.
Make a plan and then educate yourself, because you're much more powerful and competent if you're educated. Right. So why not do it?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you have a plan, that's great, and young people should have a plan, and they should stick to it, and they should have a vision for themselves of what they want to do, and they should persevere towards that vision. But the problem is finding meaning. Is like, what?
Oh, look, you worry about that afterwards. Look, we outlined domains of meaning.
Sure.
Look, family is meaningful.
Right.
Career is meaningful. You can mentor people, helping other people develop. That's extremely meaningful. Like a lot of the high-end people that I've seen who are extraordinarily successful in the socioeconomic domain derive a tremendous amount of their meaning from fostering that development among young people. And so there's micro meanings to be found in all of those domains. Now, you still might be searching for something transcendent.
Right, whether you know it or not, even like something you need as, like, the analogy would be like a crutch, right? When you're striving towards your vision and things don't go your way, tragedy happens, malevolence happens, as you say, and you're suffering in your life. You need some kind of base meta narrative, something, whether it's prayer or meditation or you're reading various types of scriptures, something to give you meaning, to give you hope, faith, and trust in something else, and just let you know that you're not in this alone, that you can get to where you want. You need that kind of emotional, spiritual crutch in your life. And this is what I wanted to ask you about, is that young people, they seem to have that less and less. So how do we find that spiritual crutch is the question.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a crutch. I don't think that's reasonable, because any genuine spiritual practice places a tremendous moral burden on its practitioner.
So let's say foundation, a spiritual foundation. Is what I mean.
Well, and some people need that more than others. Like if you're the sort of person who are, and I would say that that's likely associated with high trait openness. That's the creativity dimension. And so if you find yourself yearning, well, how do you address that? Literature, art, that's the domain. And then in that domain, there's the mystical religious domain and the philosophical domain. Well, reading is your best way into that. And you also describe the ritual practices, and they can be very useful to people. I mean, my wife found repetitive prayer of aid when she was undergoing interminable repeated scans for the presence of cancer. It's like, well, what do you do in a situation like that? Well, one thing you can do is turn to a ritual. And you might say, well, that's a crutch. It's like, well, no, it's a practice. It's a meditative practice that helps regulate your physiological reactions under extreme duress. People who think that religious belief is a crutch, first of all, they're guilty of something I think is an unbelievable impediment to reasonable progress, which is casual contempt. Like, are you sure you know enough about that to be contemptuous of it? Religious belief has a history that's tens of thousands of years old. The capacity for religious experience, and perhaps even the need for it, is coded in us biologically. It's unbelievably complicated problem and solution. You don't want to casually dismiss it. You can read philosophers and great writers and great religious thinkers and great psychoanalysts. Joseph Campbell, for example, is a great entry place for anyone who wants to take religious thinking seriously.
Right. And so this is where I'm getting at here is, so you're saying spiritual experience is encoded in our genes. And I agree with that. Whether, even people who say they're atheists or they don't believe, I think this is universal for everyone. But for people who don't have religion, who just have ideology.
Well, the atheists don't watch Star Wars.
Right. Yeah.
The atheist materialist types, the engineers, skeptical and unlikely to personalize the world, they get their mythology through science fiction and they don't even notice it.
But people who don't have that spiritual practice, don't have that religion who are watching Star Wars, participating in protests against white supremacy, how do they find that spiritual experience? How do they achieve that state? That's kind of the fundamental thing that I'm wrestling with as our society becomes more and more secular and saturated with technology and political polarization, all these other forces that seem to be distracting us from our inner primal need for spiritual experience.
I would say to some degree that's the fundamental unanswered question of our age.
Mm-hmm.